So brain aneurysm is simply a blister on a blood vessel that can burst. Now I'm going to leave the more clinical discussion to Dr. Lawton, since it's way above my pay grade. But there's an estimated 6 million, or 1 in 50 people in the United States who have an unruptured brain aneurysm. Approximately 30,000 people a year suffer from a brain aneurysm rupture. That's about 1 every 18 minutes. And if your aneurysm ruptures, your chances of survival are not very great. 40% of the time it's fatal, and for 60% they suffer permanent neurological damage. Women are also more likely to suffer from brain aneurysms than men by a ratio of 3 to 2. So no matter what the statistics say, it's a very scary disease. And furthermore, we spend very little research dollars on brain aneurysms. Now, in Congress, oftentimes we talk about how it's very difficult to legislate by body parts. But the truth of the matter is, that's how we do it. And to help put this into perspective, I want to show you what the NIH research dollars are going right now. And as you can see from the slide, $5.7 billion a year is spent on cancer research, all kinds of cancer research. $3 billion is spent on HIV/AIDS, and $2.7 billion is spent on cardiovascular disease. So, how much is spent on brain aneurysm research? Probably between $2 and $5 million a year. So, woefully inadequate. We need to do for brain aneurysms what we've done for all of these other diseases, and that's in part why we are here today. There is a bill that's going to be introduced later this week that would increase the research dollars for the National Institute of Aneurysm Research, and it would raise it to almost $10 million a year if we were successful in getting it passed. So all of you who are interested in this issue, I hope that you will call all your friends, email them, tell them to ask their local member of Congress to join on as a co-sponsor of that legislation. So with that, let's begin our program. Today, the first person we're going to hear from is a survivor, and that's Janet Hathaway. She's a survivor, and secondly, she's willing to share her story, so we're very grateful to her. She had an aneurysm rupture back in 2012, I believe it was, and she describes it as a thunderclap headache, which forced her to the ground. One thing she knew is that she needed to get to a hospital and get there quick. She's going to take us on a tour of her experience dating back to 2012 and how she's had a remarkable recovery. So Janet?
Thank you, Congresswoman Speier. To begin with, I just want to say that I hope my remarks don't in any way sound like I'm taking credit for surviving aneurysm rupture. The one thing I know is that the brilliant and talented people who treated me at UCSF are the people who deserve all the credit for my survival. And that includes Dr. Lawton, Lisa Hannigan, the chief of nursing, and the entire ICU medical staff who I was with for a month. They are the reason why I'm here today. It was nothing that I did, it was all them. They are so remarkable, and they are why I survived. Then, of course, my husband, who kept all that care going when I got home. I would not be here without them. To all of them, my deepest thanks. Let me tell you how I got to UCSF. I was in the rolling hills of Sonoma County on that May day. It was a beautiful, warm day, and I was just filled with confidence and anticipation because it was a day that I felt was going to be special, but I had no idea how special. As it turned out, it was both the unluckiest day of my life and in many ways, one of the luckiest. I was at a campus that was designed for recipients of specially trained service dogs, and I was training to receive one. It's a campus by the run by the Canine Companions for Independence, and it's a wonderful organization that trains these service dogs and matches them for people with disabilities. I'm not the typical, if there is a typical disabled person, because my disabilities flare up and they're intermittent rather than constant. So I'm not always using a wheelchair or an assistive device, but when I have migraines, I am completely overwhelmed by the pain, the neurological difficulty of walking, and those times I really benefit from having a service dog. That morning, I was paired with a beautiful Labrador Golden Retriever dog named Naya. She was quick, intelligent, incredibly athletic, and that dog became my lifetime companion. She was an ideal service dog for me, and I was completely delighted. But right after I received her, I became suddenly incredibly ill. So ill that I knew I needed to go and lie down in my dorm room, and that is what I did. The moment my head hit the pillow, the thunderclap of a rupture happened. It was the strongest pain I've ever felt at any moment in my life. In fact, I thought to myself, I'm dying. Instantly, I couldn't see out of my right eye. I tasted blood in my throat. I couldn't lift my right arm, and my right leg was just like putty. I just couldn't move. I just crashed down. And all I could think was, this is it. This is the end. But somehow I did not lose consciousness. With each moment, oddly, the pain diminished. And with this fact, it gave me hope, because I have 2 other family members who died from ruptured aneurysms, and I recognized I'm having a ruptured aneurysm. This weakness on my side, I saw it as a stroke, and I thought, they had ruptures and they died. This pain, this thunderclap, it's a stroke, and I'm not dying. So that incredible pain, I'm having it and I'm not dying, so maybe I can survive. It gave me confidence. So I got this funny confidence that I could do something. So at that moment, I just had this feeling that now I need to get myself help. The help, well, it was going to be a difficult thing to get help because I could hardly move. I was out in the middle of Sonoma County, but my first thing to do was to call Larry, and that's what I did. But I do want to just point out, for everybody who's had a friend or a family member who passed that way, that in my experience, that thunderclap is followed by a lessening of the pain. So it gives me confidence that our family members may have peaceful passings. My sight was very distorted, my legs weren't working, but I did pick up my cell phone. And I called Larry and I told him something bad has happened to me, but I'm going to get help. And I just want you to know I love you, I'm going to get to you, I'm going to figure out a way. And I didn't use the word stroke because he was more than 100 miles away and I didn't want him to be freaked out, I didn't want him to be fearful. And plus I thought I might die, and I wanted him just to have the most positive memory of me, because that was how I was feeling, was loving, and I didn't want him to just be afraid. And all I could do at that moment was just tell him, I'm going to find a way. And that was, at that moment, all I could do. And the moment I got off the phone, I just decided I'm going to be like a lizard. I'm going to roll myself off this bed. I'm going to just lizard myself across the floor and get to that door. And even though I was nauseous, and even though I could only move one side of my body, I just used my slithery body, and that's what I did. And because it was a room for disabled people with service dogs, that room had on the knob an adaptive device for dogs to pull and to open the door. And it was with that I was able to pull with my left side and open the door. And amazingly, just by coincidence or good fortune, there was one person standing in the hall outside that door, and that person happened to be an off-duty sheriff's member of the sheriff department. And that man, Mike, I said to him, I am having a stroke. I need your help. Please help me. And he instantly just kicked into action. He said, I'm going to take care of you. I'll get you to the hospital. And that is exactly what he did. He got me to Santa Rosa Hospital. The ER doctor there said, there is no way we can help you. You would die here in the night. We can't possibly take care of you. And so Mike took me and got me into another emergency vehicle to get me back down to UCSF. And when I heard those words, even though I was completely dazed at that point, it seared into my consciousness, because here was a doctor saying that I wouldn't last through the night. And I just recognized this is as close to death as I've ever been. But somehow I started to feel like I was being carried forth. I was being given whatever help I needed. And I had confidence still I was going to get what I needed. Somehow, everything I needed was coming for me, was the people around me were holding me up. And I am just so grateful for that. Mike did put me on that journey. He got me into that vehicle, and he called Larry and told him where I was going, where I'd be. And by that combination of wonderful people, people who gave of themselves, people who cared, I got to UCSF, and instantly people knew how to treat me. People knew exactly what to do to stabilize me until Dr. Lawton could treat me. All I can say is, for anybody who has an aneurysm, I just hope they never have a rupture. But if they do have a rupture, may they have someone like Dr. Lawton with the skills that he has to take care of them. And may they have people with the generosity that I met to carry them through the journey that they have to go through. Thank you all so much.
Janet, you have us all spellbound. Thank you for your beautiful remarks and your real outlook about life, because that had everything to do with your survival, I'm sure. So now we're going to hear from the surgeon who kept her alive. Dr. Michael Lawton has surgically treated more than 4,000 brain aneurysms. He's been here on the West Coast for 18 years. He's the chief of vascular neurosurgery at UCSF, specializing in surgical treatments of aneurysms. And he is also vice chairman of the department and the Tom Procon endowed chair at UCSF. So welcome. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Lawton.
Thank you, Congresswoman. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for you spending your time with us today. Well, this is really, it's become sort of my life's work, is to treat people with aneurysms. And fortunately for me, it's something I love to do, and it's a really challenging thing. But what I think that I love the most is just hearing stories like this, and realizing that, what I do, it's not about back pain or nips and tucks. It's about rescuing people from really being so close to death, really the jaws of death, and pulling them back to life. And seeing people like you, Janet, and so many people in this room who have done just that is really what makes my job so wonderful. So I'd like to just show some pictures and try and educate people who, you all who are here to learn a little bit about brain aneurysms. And I think, Congresswoman Speier gave us some very nice statistics just to show you the magnitude of the problem. It really affects 1 to 2% of our population, and for every million people in a city, there are going to be 100 every year that have this subarachnoid hemorrhage problem. And if you look at that bottom line, about half of the patients will end up dying from it. So it's really a life and death disease. This is a picture of the brain, and what you see in the picture is what normal arteries should look like. They're like branches on a tree, and it's a beautiful landscape, really. But things go wrong at those bifurcation points, and an aneurysm is essentially a blowout, just as you would have on a tire, where those forces of the flow push the wall and weaken the wall, and you get this sac formation, this ballooning out that can then lead to a rupture. You can get aneurysms at all different locations. These are some of the different spots. They're commonly seen around what we call the circle of Willis, which is that circle under the brain in the very center. But you can see them up and down the brainstem in a variety of different locations and also different sizes and shapes. The arteries live in this space called the subarachnoid space. It's a contained compartment, and there are these little layers that envelop the arteries. And so when patients have a rupture from this, it's called a subarachnoid hemorrhage, because it's that subarachnoid layer, that almost cellophane around the arteries that holds the blood, and that's what causes the pressure to be so high and the pain to be so excruciating. But this is what a rupture would look like. It's typically at the dome of an aneurysm, right at the top. It's that spilling of blood into the spaces around the brain, and that sudden elevation of pressure from something around 20 millimeters of mercury to about 4 or 5 times that. So that's why it's that thunderclap, that excruciating sudden pain. What people say when they come in is so characteristic. They almost routinely say it's the worst headache of their life. It's sudden in onset, it's severe, so that if you ask them to grade it on a scale of 1 to 10, they'll say it's a 12 or a 15. There's nausea, there's vomiting, stiff neck, the light may bother you. These are all other symptoms to look out for, or you can have a seizure. These are the lucky patients, because the unlucky patients come in a coma and they never have a chance to tell you about what they're feeling. But importantly, half the patients have no warning sign, so these can really strike completely out of the blue. This is what a subarachnoid hemorrhage will look like on a CT scan, and we train our medical students, all of our doctors, to recognize this pattern, because if you see this, you know there's an aneurysm until proven otherwise. And if we see that, we do lots of tests. These are what's called an angiogram, where we inject some dye in the blood vessels, and that dye then runs through the pipes, and when we take an x-ray and subtract out all the other stuff, all we see are these nice black lines which represent those tree branches, those normal vessels. And then you can see very clearly that ball of black right in the center of that screen there that represents that balloon, the aneurysm. Over here we've got a little 3D reconstruction just to show you what the technology has allowed us to do. Just from those two-dimensional images, we can transform those into these beautiful three-dimensional pictures that give us a real clear picture of what we're up against. We can do this without needles and dye. We can do a CT with a CT angiogram. It's a little faster and a little less invasive, so this is yet another way to identify an aneurysm if you're in a hurry. But then once we have our culprit, then it's about fixing it. And there are a couple of options. You either go in surgically and clip it, which is what I have focused my career on. You can do endovascular therapies, which go through the arteries, through catheters, which are a less invasive way of doing it. Or for patients with small unruptured aneurysms, sometimes the better part of valor is just to watch and see what it does. And so that's an option as well to consider. This is what clipping looks like. That balloon at the bifurcation of an artery gets a little clip, a mechanical closure device that seals that that opening shut. It mechanically reinforces the bifurcation, and that's as good as gold. It's never going to come back. It's never going to need additional touching up, and patients are done with their treatment with that. This is me under the microscope, and I just wanted to show you how we do this. This is not something that's that you can just look in and see like a general surgery case. You have to work through a very small hole, and these vessels are very tiny, so we need this powerful microscope that allows me to expand my field of view way beyond what the normal eye can do. That's, through that microscope, I see things at about 10 times the magnification, and it gives me light, it gives me that magnification, and it allows me to really navigate safely through those small corridors under the brain. This is the surgeon's view. This is the kind of view that one gets. You have to capitalize on the normal spaces around the brain and get down to the arteries, and then look for that aneurysm right there on the carotid artery. And that's sort of the surgeon's view and how we get to these things. And once we're there, we can put that clip on through that small surgical corridor. So that's what clipping's all about. There are lots of different clips, and there are a lot of different ways to do this. That's what makes my job exciting and fun, is that it's almost like an art form to find the very best way to reconstruct those pathologic tissues into something that's going to hold and be durable for the rest of the patient's life. And we go from that aneurysm there on the left to this here on the right, where it's completely reconstructed and looks as good as new. That's what an aneurysm looks like in real life. Those artist illustrations are one thing, but this is what it looks like under that microscope with pulsating flow and pulsating tissues. And when we put clips on, we can reconstruct those weak spots and take them out of the circulation and get things repaired. This is another view, just looking down a different part of the brain and showing a very large aneurysm down there in the depths of the hole there.
Could you show it? Where is it on that last slide? Is it?
Yeah. This is it right here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Do people have strong stomachs in the audience? Because I do have a video. I'm not sure it's a good idea, but a nearly giant anti-communicating artery aneurysm. Sorry, I guess the angiogram here shows the serpentine channel flowing from the right A1 through the aneurysm here.
Oh, wow.
A nearly giant anti-communicating artery aneurysm. Arteries flowing from the aneurysm and coursing up the inner hemispheric fissure. Now we're at the level of the genu of the corpus callosum. There. Now you don't have to listen to all that. This is just what some of these things look like under the microscope. These are arteries, and with that big aneurysm, which is down here, what I was going to do for this one was to sew two vessels together downstream from the aneurysm, and that will allow me to then pinch off the inflow and the outflow, or in other words, what we call a trap. And so this is yet another way that we sometimes repair aneurysms, and I just wanted to not gross you out or anything, but show you how, what some of this looks like under the microscope and some of the different surgical techniques that we use. This is bringing those vessels together, and I'm just going to jump way ahead here. This is what that artificial connection now between those two vessels looks like in this person's head. And now there's the aneurysm. And that's becomes a very simple thing now with the bypass to just go down and put clips in front so that the flow can't get into the aneurysm, and put clips behind so the flow can't leave the aneurysm, and basically isolate it from the circulation. So this is yet another way to fix this aneurysm. And here is what an angiogram afterward looks like with no aneurysm there. So here's the other way to treat an aneurysm. You can take that sac and you can fill it with a coil. It's like a metallic plug, and a coil or strand, as you deliver it, will conform to the shape of that sac. So it gives you the ability to push it through a very thin catheter that will navigate up the artery and fill that sac. And so these are some examples. You see, here's the angiogram. Well, my pointer doesn't work, but you can see the coil here that fills the aneurysm as a plug, and this is what the angiogram looks like after it's repaired. Sometimes the necks are not real favorable for coils, so we can lay in a stent. and it will help hold the coil inside the aneurysm. So you can see the aneurysm on the left there, but then here's the stent plus the coil. The stent is like a little tube that runs inside the artery and just holds that nest of coils inside the sac. So this is yet another way. And there are even newer devices. This is just an example of how the technology evolves so rapidly now that we have what we call a flow diverter. This is like a stent that's a little bit thicker, and it actually forces the flow to stay inside the stent and out of the aneurysm. And this is yet another way to treat aneurysms. So we have a lot of tricks, a lot of options, and I think we've done really well in tackling this disease. It's really now more about getting patients before they get to the point of rupture. This is, I think, my favorite picture from the whole talk, and it just shows what this is all about. Again, we bring people back to life from this critical point where they're almost dead. And here, this is our brain aneurysm awareness walk in Christie Field, and you can see all these survivors and family members of survivors just showing that real intense pride to have survived and to be able to enjoy their lives now and move on. So they're life-threatening problems, easily cured when diagnosed and repaired. It's important to recognize those warning signs that Janet shared with you and that I've tried to reinforce. There are screening tests for family members in your family that have had an aneurysm that can help diagnose this before they rupture. If that's the case, that's a very important thing to do. And if you do have any of these warning signs, you have to seek out help immediately. Last thing is just, as Janet said, if you get to people or centers that really do this regularly, your chances of doing well are really quite good. So that's really critically important. So I wanted to be brief, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
So Janet's guardian angel through all of this was her caregiver, her husband, Larry Arndt. And Larry is now going to talk to us about the role of a caregiver.
Thank you, Congresswoman Speier. So, during Janet's craniotomy the next morning, I was in the waiting room with our dear friend Nick. Hi, Nick. Who's also my sound engineer. He just happens to be a UCSF employee whose office at the time was on the floor right above the neuro ICU. So Dr. Lawton appeared, and he informed us that Janet's aneurysm surgery was successful. However, her right carotid had burst at the end of the surgery. He attempted to repair it, it burst again, and he needed to clip it. I think that Nick was holding on to me as I slumped.
The other way around.
Anyway, Dr. Lawton was encouraging, and he told me that some people can tolerate the loss of the carotid very well. I later called Dr. Gregory Poxtus, Janet's neurologist, and he reiterated that some people can tolerate it. He also observed that Dr. Lawton is definitely the person you want in your head when your carotid bursts. Janet was hospitalized for 4 weeks. We celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary in the neuro ICU about a week after her rupture. The staff there were caregiver role models. They were, in addition to being totally competent, they were kind, caring, gentle, patient, and unflappable. I tried to remember their example when I was Janet's caregiver after she came home. While she was in the hospital, my caregiving consisted mostly of just being there, watching no-no commercials with her, bringing wallaby yogurt and coffee from the cafe as a special treat from time to time. Nick was a caregiver for both of us, visiting Janet often and helping me through the tough times. He even produced a beautiful enlargement of a photo of Naya that had been provided by the trainers at CCI, and that portrait really helped to buoy her spirits. So in the scariness and uncertainty of the situation, some of which is coming back to me now, I developed some strategies that helped me to refrain, more or less, from freaking out. We were, after all, in the neuro ICU at UCSF. Janet could not be in a better place. And I understood that didn't guarantee survival or any particular degree of recovery, but it provided me with some comfort that no matter what happened, she couldn't be getting better care. And when I felt my anxiety and worry about the future rising, I would try to focus on the present and try to be comfortable with the reality that there was no way to know what was going to happen next. If there was something I could do at the moment, and usually there wasn't, I should try to do it. But otherwise, I should just try to be with the discomfort and the fear, with all of that taking over and amplifying itself. What it really became was, when I started to freak out, I would just try to remember that I had a strategy for coping with that when it started to happen. So along the way, Janet's head began swelling due to hydrocephalus, resulting from the damage to her brain done by the bleed. A drain was installed in her spine to remove the excess cerebrospinal fluid, and that seemed to do the trick. She was doing really well and was scheduled to be discharged on a Sunday morning about 3.5 weeks after she'd been admitted to UCSF. So I arrived that morning, ready to take her home, to find her in bed in the fetal position, surrounded by hospital staff. I learned that she had a 103-degree temperature due to bacterial meningitis, perhaps a consequence of the hydrocephalus treatment. And Janet and I are now really grateful that she wasn't discharged before the onset of the meningitis. So during her initial recovery from the meningitis, she was a bit disoriented. She was in a room with a view of the forest on Mount Sutro behind UCSF, the Parnassus campus, and the trees there led her to think that she was in Canada. So she told me that she was so happy that I had traveled all the way up there to visit her. And once, while we were doing therapeutic laps around the floor using her rolling walker, she stopped in front of the elevator, pressed the down button, and told me that she was ready to leave. She wanted me to get the car and drive her home. She'd had enough. Well, maybe she wasn't disoriented about that. So on the 30th day, she was discharged. She was still on an antibiotic regimen to finish off the meningitis, and so she left the hospital with a PICC line in her arm. For a week, I gave her injections every 8 hours at 10 a.m., 6 p.m., and 2 a.m. I'm out of practice now, 4 years later, but at the time I got pretty adept at the, to me, complex sequence of steps for sterilizing the components with alcohol, flushing the line, delivering the medicine, flushing the line again, and cleaning up at the end of it all. In contrast to the rupture and those complications, Janet's recovery went relatively smoothly. After a week at home, the PICC line was removed. At 4 weeks, she was able to walk across the street to spend some time socializing at our neighbor's annual 4th of July party. At 6 weeks, we returned to CCI, where she spent a couple of days training with Naya, and after that, Naya came home with us. That signaled the remarkable progress that Janet was making toward resuming the life that she had been living before the aneurysm burst.
What a beautiful love story, isn't it? Thank you, Larry, for that incredible.
So the Brain Aneurysm Foundation was established in Boston in 1994 as a public charity, and the foundation developed from a close relationship between patients, healthcare professionals who identified the need for more information and support for brain aneurysm patients, their family, as well as the medical community. The Brain Aneurysm Foundation is now known as a globally recognized leader in brain aneurysm support, awareness, education, advocacy, and research funding. Our mission is to promote the early detection of brain aneurysms by providing knowledge and raising awareness of the signs, the symptoms, and the risk factors, and to work with the medical communities to provide the support networks for patients and families, as well as to further research that will improve patient outcomes and save lives. So support, again, that was really the basis of why this foundation started, and the ways we give support is by our office staff, who's available 5 days a week, over 70 support groups across the country, where people voluntarily, like Nurse Lisa Hannigan here from UCFS, who was instrumental in getting Janet and Larry to come speak today, so I'm very grateful for her, but people like her across the country that volunteer their time for these support groups, online support groups, which are available from the foundation website, and I heard earlier talking to Janet that she's found that very helpful, and we have monthly webinars, and our website itself is a great resource and does provide support to a lot of people at different times and being newly diagnosed or in their recovery. So the support groups are important just from getting support from other people, hearing from others their journeys, coping skills, unique friendships that develop, and connections to other resources. And through education and just group discussions, the aim is to alleviate fears. And as Larry, I think, addressed, caregivers need support too. So it's very important through these support groups that we have across the country. Sometimes they have a special meeting for caregivers, or they have a special time of meeting for the caregivers to get together and talk with each other so they can talk more openly and more freely. Patient education is another aspect of the foundation, and we have 4 educational booklets that go to a lot of the hospitals across the country. They're now available in 4 languages, fact sheets, videos, webinars, symposiums, and the newest thing that we've developed is a youth fact sheet because it came to our attention with all this information about such a horribly scary disease. You know, what do you tell children? And so there was a gentleman who lost his mom a couple years ago, and he's a teacher in New York, so he kind of prompted us, something that had been on our to-do list for a while, you know, what do you tell children? How do you explain it to them? So we worked with a producer for some of our videos that and awareness initiatives we worked on this year, and they came up with these cartoon brains and cartoon aneurysm figures. And it's funny what you find out through social media, and everyone has their opinion on things. I'm always willing to give something a try, so I said, all right, we'll see what happens. We started them on social media, and these little brainy cartoony aneurysms and brain characters, and some have hats on, one's a girl, one's a boy. Through social media, they get more hits and shares than anything that we've ever posted, so you just never know. Medical education, we've had a CME course that's been given across the country by different doctors for primary care physicians to alert them to the signs and symptoms to promote early detection of brain aneurysms. And we also developed a new early detection video. We did one probably 6-8 years ago. We did it again for ER professionals, EMTs, and nurses to know the signs and symptoms of brain aneurysms. Awareness, it's part of everything we do. It's being here today, symposiums, social media, lobbying efforts, being at different conferences, trying to have September pass as Brain Aneurysm Awareness Month. Advocacy, another portion of the foundation that started 5 years ago. We go in May and have a day on the Hill, and as the Congresswoman said, that's how someone in our group that came connected with her, and thank you again, Congresswoman, for listening and taking it the next step to have us all come together today to learn a little bit more about this disease. We're working on disease-specific funding through appropriations and authorizations, stressing the importance of early detections and that scans being done by insurers and paying that cost up front can save billions in terms of lifetime care for people who survive with different disabilities and not being able to go back to work. And also, as the Congresswoman referenced earlier, we're just trying to get parity in research dollars for the incidence of people affected by this disease. And we have been very lucky to have the pro bono services of Arnold and Porter to lead us on this way. And then research grant funding. So this is something that started 10 years ago. We started the first year with $20,000. Just last week in Atlanta, we awarded $310,000 in research grant funding. So we've awarded close to $2 million, and we're the largest private funder of brain aneurysm research. And I know that this year, Dr. Matthew Alexander from UCSF was one of our research grant recipients. And what's really neat about our program, organization is still so grassroots, and most of our research grant money comes from people who developed years of research, and they're either families or survivors that have events for us. So the funding that went to Dr. Alexander was either a $20,000 or $25,000 grant that came from people who participated. It's called Team Cindy Alcatraz, people who do the Escape from Alcatraz event. So this year I think there were maybe 6 or 7 of them, and next year we're going to have a team of 15. So, it's definitely a group effort to raise awareness and raise the funding for this disease. New projects that the foundation did this year, and you can find them all when you go to our website and click on our YouTube. We did a PSA called Pleased to Meet You, kind of a dramatic portrayal of the warning signs targeting people who've never heard of brain aneurysms before, to get them to go to our website and know the signs, the symptoms, and the risk factors. Again, this early detection video we redid just so EMS and urgent care providers and other medical professionals who have the first chance to consider brain aneurysm as a possible diagnosis. And that video is broken up by different people's stories on our YouTube as well. And then we have Ellie's story, a documentary of a young 14-year-old girl who died 2 years ago on her second day of high school. And her parents and her 2 younger siblings came together to help us get their story out so other people don't have to go through what they went through. So the core purpose of the foundation is to save lives, reduce suffering, and improve the quality of life for everybody affected by a brain aneurysm. The greatest resources the foundation has, our website, which was actually just revamped again, probably in May. We put it into a WordPress format, so it should be more easily navigable for everybody. And honestly, if anyone ever has any input of information that's missing or things they'd like to add, or please feel free to always reach out. Then our medical advisory board, which Dr. Lawton is a part of, because the medical advisory board provides us with all the information that is on our website, any numbers or facts or figures. The medical advisory board scores our research grants that come in, and they just provide a really solid base and core for our organization. And then again, everybody who is in this room who can help spread the word, let people know what the signs are, when to get help, and just know that this organization is here as a resource for you. So I just want to say thank you again to everyone for coming today. Thank you, Congresswoman Speier. Your staff that I've worked with coming up to here, our other panel participants, Dr. Lawton, Janet Hathaway, and Larry Arndt, and also again Lisa Hannigan for bringing everybody here together. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine.
I was in the rolling hills of Sonoma County on that May day. It was a beautiful warm day, and I was just filled with confidence and anticipation because it was a day that I felt was going to be special, but I had no idea how special. As it turned out, it was both the unluckiest day of my life and, in many ways, one of the luckiest. I was at a campus that was designed for recipients of specially trained service dogs, and I was training to receive one. It's a campus by the run by the Canine Companions for Independence, and it's a wonderful organization that trains these service dogs and matches them for people with disabilities. I'm not the typical, if there is a typical disabled person, because my disabilities flare up and they're intermittent rather than constant, so I'm not always using a wheelchair or an assistive device, but when I have migraines, I am completely overwhelmed by the pain, the neurological difficulty of walking, and those times I really benefit from having a service dog. That morning, I was paired with a beautiful Labrador Golden Retriever dog named Naya. She was quick, intelligent, incredibly athletic, and that dog became my lifetime companion. She was an ideal service dog for me, and I was completely delighted. But right after I received her, I became suddenly incredibly ill. So ill that I knew I needed to go and lie down in my dorm room, and that is what I did. The moment my head hit the pillow, the thunderclap of a rupture happened. It was the strongest pain I've ever felt at any moment in my life. In fact, I thought to myself, I'm dying. Instantly, I couldn't see out of my right eye. I tasted blood in my throat. I couldn't lift my right arm. And my right leg was just like putty. I just couldn't move. I just crashed down. And all I could think was, this is it. This is the end. But somehow I did not lose consciousness. With each moment, oddly, the pain diminished. And with this fact, it gave me hope, because I have 2 other family members who died from ruptured aneurysms, and I recognized I'm having a ruptured aneurysm. This weakness on my side, I saw it as a stroke, and I thought, they had ruptures and they died. This pain, this thunderclap, it's a stroke, and I'm not dying. So that incredible pain, I'm having it and I'm not dying, so maybe I can survive. It gave me confidence. So I got this funny confidence that I could do something. So at that moment, I just had this feeling that now I need to get myself help. The help, well, it was going to be a difficult thing to get help because I could hardly move. I was out in the middle of Sonoma County, but my first thing to do was to call Larry, and that's what I did. But I do want to just point out for everybody who's had a friend or a family member who passed that way, that in my experience, that thunderclap is followed by a lessening of the pain. So it gives me confidence that our family members may have peaceful passings. My sight was very distorted. My legs weren't working, but I did pick up my cell phone. And I called Larry and I told him something bad has happened to me, but I'm going to get help. And I just want you to know I love you. I'm going to get to you. I'm going to figure out a way. And I didn't use the word stroke because he was more than 100 miles away, and I didn't want him to be freaked out. I didn't want him to be fearful. And plus, I thought I might die, and I wanted him just to have the most positive memory of me, because that was how I was feeling, was loving, and I didn't want him just be afraid. And all I could do at that moment was just tell him, I'm going to find a way. And that was, at that moment, all I could do. And the moment I got off the phone, I just decided I'm going to be like a lizard. I'm going to roll myself off this bed. I'm going to just lizard myself across the floor and get to that door. And even though I was nauseous, and even though I could only move one side of my body, I just used my slithery body, and that's what I did. And because it was a room for disabled people with service dogs, that room had on the knob an adaptive device for dogs to pull and to open the door. And it was with that I was able to pull with my left side and open the door. And amazingly, just by coincidence or good fortune, there was one person standing in the hall outside that door, and that person happened to be an off-duty sheriff's member of the sheriff's department. And that man, Mike, I said to him, I am having a stroke. I need your help. Please help me. And he instantly just kicked into action. He said, I'm going to take care of you. I'll get you to the hospital. And that is exactly what he did. He got me to Santa Rosa Hospital. The ER doctor there said, there is no way we can help you. You would die here in the night. We can't possibly take care of you. And so Mike took me and got me into another emergency vehicle to get me back down to UCSF. And when I heard those words, even though I was completely dazed at that point, it seared into my consciousness, because here was a doctor saying that I wouldn't last through the night. And I just recognized this is as close to death as I've ever been. But somehow I started to feel like I was being carried forth. I was being given whatever help I needed. And I had confidence still I was going to get what I needed. Somehow, everything I needed was coming for me, was the people around me were holding me up. And I am just so grateful for that. Mike did put me on that journey. He got me into that vehicle, and he called Larry and told him where I was going, where I'd be. And by that combination of wonderful people, people who gave of themselves, people who cared, I got to UCSF, and instantly people knew how to treat me. People knew exactly what to do to stabilize me until Dr. Lawton could treat me. All I can say is, for anybody who has an aneurysm, I just hope they never have a rupture. But if they do have a rupture, may they have someone like Dr. Lawton with the skills that he has to take care of them. And may they have people with the generosity that I met to carry them through the journey that they have to go through. Thank you all so much.